Welcome to the podcast. This is your source for growth, innovation, and impact in VHA's Office of Finance. My name is Bill, and I will be your host today. Before we dive in, I want to say something I mean sincerely. This episode, this is for everybody, not just the people with manager or supervisor in their title, because leadership isn't defined by a title or a position, it's defined by influence, integrity, and action. Where positional authority may give you responsibility, real leadership is earned through trust, collaboration, and the example that you set every day. Whether you lead a team or you contribute as an individual, you are a leader. Because leadership starts with how you show up, how you serve, and how you inspire others. So that's the lens that I want you to use today. Today we're traveling back to ancient Rome. The Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar, maybe you've heard of it. Every time I look at our schedule in pod and I see the class conflict resolution or, one of those meeting classes, difficult meetings, something like that, I think about the Ides of March and I think about Julius Caesar and I have a question that I genuinely can't shake. What if Caesar had seen the warning signs? What if he'd leaned into dialogue instead of doubling down on his power and his authority? Could history have changed? And I ask this because, honestly, I feel like I've been Caesar in a meeting before. Maybe not with the toga, not in front of the Senate, but I've had that same blind spot where I was so focused on the goal that I missed the tension that was building up in the room. And by the time I noticed, it's too late, the damage was done. So today we're going to explore that what if and connect it to how we lead and resolve our conflict in our own teams. Caesar was brilliant, ambitious, and powerful, but his rise created tension. Senators feared losing influence. Friends became rivals. He burned a lot of bridges, and instead of addressing those concerns, Caesar doubled down. He took more power for himself. He ignored the dissent, and he assumed that loyalty was guaranteed. Does this sound familiar? Well, in any organization, when leaders ignore concerns or when they fail to communicate, the trust is the first thing to go. People will feel unheard, and when that happens, the resistance grows. Sometimes it happens quietly, but sometimes it's dramatic. Et tu, Brute, he reportedly said as he fell on the floor of the theater of Pompey. But here's the thing, the betrayal didn't start on March 15th. It started in every conversation Caesar chose not to have. Picture this. Julius Caesar walks into a modern leadership workshop, or he logs into Teams, right? The facilitator smiles and says, "Welcome, Julius. Today we're talking about conflict resolution." Now, of course, this makes Caesar raise an eyebrow because in his world, conflict was solved with swords, not conversations. But this is what the facilitator teaches him, and what I keep coming back to in my own work. The first step is to listen actively. Instead of dismissing the senosphere, Caesar invites dialogue. Tell me what concerns you most about these reforms. Now imagine the shock in the room. For the first time, the senators feel heard, right? I know I've walked into rooms with the best intentions and I still managed to put people on the defensive, well, because I was talking when I should have been listening. Active listening isn't passive, it's a leadership skill. The next step would be to seek common ground. Because conflict isn't about winning, it's about finding shared goals. Caesar could have said, "We all want Rome to thrive." How do we balance stability with progress? That's collaboration, not coercion. And here's a phrase that a colleague recently shared with me that I think about constantly. People need to understand the how behind the why. The why is easy. We need to do this, but how are we going to do it? We're making this change because it's better, but it's the how. How it will work. What role are you going to play? How it affects your day. That actually gets people to accept. But Caesar never got to the how. Step 3, addressing issues early. When you ignore conflict, it becomes conflict amplified. Caesar had warning signs all over the place. There were rumors, there was resistance, even a couple of soothsayers. But he didn't act. A timely conversation might have changed everything. I want you to think about a time that you left a conversation thinking, how could I have handled that better? Or maybe a time that someone lost your confidence because of the way something was said, or maybe wasn't said. Those moments don't announce themselves. You have to go looking for them. Because authority without trust is fragile. And unfortunately, Caesar proved that the hard way. So what does this mean for us? We're not dodging daggers in the Senate, but we do face disagreements about processes, priorities, changes. And I'm going to be honest, I've entered conversations with good intentions and a bad mindset and created conflict that never needed to exist. So here's what I take from Caesar's story. Listen before you act. When change creates tension, ask questions first. Understanding those concerns before you offer solutions. It's not a weakness. That's wisdom. Share the how behind the why. People resist what they don't understand. When we explain not just why a new process matters, but how it works and what role each person plays, resistance turns into ownership. That was true in Rome, and that's true in claims processing. And finally, address conflicts early. As Barney Fife says, nip it in the bud. Don't wait for issues to escalate. In our world, that means clarifying roles before there's confusion, surfacing bottlenecks before they become crises, and making sure people feel heard before they stop talking altogether. When we do that well, we build trust. And not just with our teams, but with the veterans, with the providers, and beneficiaries who are counting on us to get it right. Here's what I wanted to leave you with. One thing you can do before your next meeting or your next tough conversation. I want you to ask yourself, what might be going unsaid here? And am I walking in ready to listen or ready to win? Because here is the one thing about Caesar. He wasn't a villain. He was a leader who stopped paying attention to the people around him. And that's a mistake that any of us can easily make. This episode actually started as a joke. Brian and I were brainstorming March marketing ideas, and I had this image of Caesar on the Senate floor saying, "Oh, if only I'd attended more pod training." Well, we laughed about that, but then I thought, actually, there's something real there. And maybe sometimes the best ideas start as a laugh. Do you have any ideas for a future episode? We'd love to hear them. So go ahead and comment below on our SharePoint or hit me up directly. Next time we're diving into one of my personal favorites. It's Chesterton's Fence. Until then, keep leading with purpose and keep building trust before conflicts build walls.